This is awesome. But we want to get some questions in.
I will whistle through my next few slides. I've got some practical tips on cash conversion, which I will probably have to flick through very quickly. I want to highlight just a couple of points here. So the first one is that, how did we actually do that? How did we get our days up from 40 to 80? Well, the key thing was to make sure that finance was the sort of team and resource that owned this. And it involves finance being fairly nasty to a bunch of people who are important to you, and it involves them having complete control over the process to be able to manage what is a pretty difficult tightrope. We were aiming for an extra day from all of our suppliers on payment terms every single month, and we pulled that off through a variety of slightly questionable techniques, and it is much easier to centralize that in a couple of. In our case, we had 2 finance guys who deserve all the credit for that. They were fantastic. Businesses where the sales team is involved with the cash collection or anything like that will never manage this. As I've mentioned already, your customers can help you too. I won't have time for this in detail, but our gift campaigns and things like that were very helpful, and the mobile phone industry is brilliant at this. If you really examine in detail the pay-as-you-go tricks of the trade, they're really onto this in a big way. And your suppliers can really help you. And I'm not talking about the obvious stuff of sort of just asking for more payment terms from your suppliers. Some critical ones that you should really pay attention to. If you're taking credit card billings, then your payment partners make a real difference on cash flow if you can get that right. See me afterwards. And as I've already alluded to, your marketing partners, which for LoveFilm were a massive expense, are actually where a lot of our credit came from, chiefly because we were so focused on making that marketing performance-based. And if you're paying for a customer only after they've become a paying sub, and even better, maybe they've had to pay 3 times before you owe a bounty, which a lot of partners think is entirely reasonable, that's effectively giving you an enormous amount of credit. And if you can persuade your partners to run off a quarterly reporting statement instead of a monthly one, that's 60 days more credit for you. And it's just, there are lots of subtle things that the partner's finance team don't spot and create a lot of credit for you. I'm almost done. I've got one slide on how to scale. I think scaling is absolutely critical. It's not possible to do it justice in 17 seconds. I think the critical thing for me is that it's not something you can assign responsibility for. It's got to start at the top. I've called scaling being like blonde hair. We all like it. Some people have it in your DNA, some people don't. Everybody can pretend to have it with a clever trip to the hairdresser, but actually you are looking for the genuine article. And you want people who really understand scaling and they live and breathe it. And when you look at the really successful e-commerce businesses coming out of the US or here, I'm thinking of Amazon particularly, which I've worked very closely with in the last few years. Everybody you meet in Amazon understands how important scaling is. Everybody understands that Jeff Bezos himself is going to come and sit on their desk if they do anything that interrupts Amazon's ability to scale. And actually, although it sounds daft and although it sounds difficult to believe when you're in a cash crunch and you're scrabbling for revenues, scaling is the only thing which for a startup is more important than revenue and more important than profit if you're actually going to make some money. So I'm going to leave you with that thought and take any questions we have time for.
Are there any questions before William leaves the stage? Just there.
Netflix did something very, very helpful to us before I even started the industry, and that was try and go public. And then they did something even more helpful, which was succeed in going public, and that provided an absolute ream of useful data and a necessity for them to communicate to, essentially a lot of very valuable things to the market every 3 months. I also happen to have in my social network somebody who was a landlord of one of their distribution centres, which proved quite helpful as well. Do be careful about that sort of thing, everybody. So we had a whole variety of ways. Plus, they launched in the UK, or at least they nearly launched in the UK, and they hired about 30 people before deciding that the UK did in fact look a little bit terrifying for them. And so those 30 people suddenly all got P45s and a huge chip on their shoulder, and they proved very helpful as well.
Okay, there's a question at the back here.
Hi, William. Quick question.
Sorry, yeah.
How much effort did you put into the billing technology? You talked about the technology spend. There seems to be a real lack in the UK marketplace of a sort of subscription-type billing model, which is very easy and cheap for startups to use on a scalable model. How much effort did you actually put into that technology, and how much of the technology effort was on the sort of what the consumer sees?
That's a very good question, Nick. And one of the things that Screen Select had in its favour, I think, was that it did put a lot of effort into the payments technology. We had our philosophy was that actually, when you're billing £10 a month, the billing fees are a big number, and they're a big impact on your gross margins. And we really pushed on that, and we took the view that the biggest difference was actually when we merged with LoveFilm. We saw their numbers. Now LoveFilm was about, as you can see on this graph, about 60% as big as us. Their monthly payment numbers were about 40 times higher than ours, and that was because they were using data cash. And data cash is essentially a very highly resilient, robust platform designed essentially for betting firms. And as a subscription business, billing people at 4 a.m. when they're asleep, you don't need that. And we decided we were going to build that resilience in ourselves. And we went with the cheapest provider who didn't offer us the same resilience, and built that resilience internally by having a backup supplier, and that saved us a factor of 40 on payment costs. So we put more effort into it than most, and it saved us probably over the life of this graph £300,000, which, as I've probably indicated, mattered to us a lot.
Awesome. Everybody, we're going to move to our next speaker. Thank you